But there are certain things about Estonia versus, let's say, Latvia, or Latvia versus Lithuania, or Finland versus Sweden. There are certain things in each of those countries and each of those cultures that are special or different that might explain the differences in their success rates. One thing that's been great for Estonia is sort of the early win of Skype. Way back when, when the Ahti Heinla, those guys were working with Skype to make the psychological break and the through the barrier of, oh God, we're this tiny little elfin nation next to this giant bear Russia. How could we ever? And coming from a Soviet background, we've only had this many years of independence, right? After the 80s, late 80s. How could we possibly be successful? How could we possibly have a unicorn? It's just the mathematics are so against it. But then when the Skype guys were successful, suddenly you think about it, you're like, well, fuck, these guys did it. They're Estonian. They live in this same city and town I do. They drink the same water. They eat the same food. I'm just as tall as them. Like, why can't I do it? And it becomes so much more, I think, approachable and believable that it is possible to make it, And then there were a couple other successes after that that were Hardy Maybaum with his startup, and then later on, of course, the Pipedrives and the TransferWises, and the more that flywheel keeps going and the stronger it becomes, the more founders you have now coming out of these successes with money with which they can start their next project, with experience with which they can start their next project, with networks with which they can start the next project. So they come out fully armed, ready for battle, because they have all of the things that a startup needs to succeed. They will have the skills, the network, and the seed money, the initial money to at least do the prototype. So having these early wins, having the early successes really feeds on then more and more people going into entrepreneurship, believing this is a legitimate lifestyle, a legitimate career choice, right? And really dedicating themselves to that system. What has been also very, very special, specifically in Estonia, is that vast majority of these guys did not take their money and go to Bahamas. They did not, go to, I don't know, Malta and buy a mansion and, just hang out and surf in Portugal. Almost all of them did second and third startups. Almost all of them are angel investors. Almost all of them are at least advisors or something. They're still doing things with the Estonian teams. And that experience is extremely valuable, and it really feeds the next cycles of startups. The countries that don't have those early wins, it seems really hard for them to get that first one, to actually believe like, oh God, we can't do it. We don't have the money, we don't have the background, we don't have the people. It seems like the list of things you don't have is so long that psychologically it's difficult to break through. I think you see that also in sports. If you look at Estonia currently has Ott Tanak as a world champion rally driver, and there's a whole generation of young rally drivers that are all in like the top 10, top 15 in the world. Why? Because they saw Ott growing up, watching on TV. They saw him win on Estonian roads with an Estonian co-driver, and they believe they can do it, and they can. In women's tennis, so many Estonian girls have been watching Anett play and become number 2 in the world, right? And you see that you're like, hey, we have the same tennis court. I have the same racket, we have the same ball. Maybe I can do it too. And it really creates a whole new generation of players, entrepreneurial players or sports players that believe in themselves enough to really put the effort into it and make it into a career choice.